All right, welcome to the military, an introduction for all Americans. I'm Brother Logan Isaac. I'm going to be your instructor in this brief mini course on becoming a soldier, how you go from being a civilian to becoming a soldier. So, this is just the first of about a 6-part series on becoming a soldier, how the total force is organized, and demographics of the total force, and then the same exact organization for the veteran community as opposed to the total force. So when I say the total force, I mean all members of the military, past, present, anybody with a signed contract with a service branch. So we have service members, which make up the total force. And there's some cadets who are under obligation for receiving tuition assistance, delayed entry program like I had. Then there's the active components, the Federal Reserve components, and 2 National Guard branches. There's also this thing called the Ready Reserve that is technically service members because they still have a military service obligation. You'll see that in a later slide. Now, I won't talk about it now, but there's also veterans and dishonorable discharges who are not veterans. So the total force is anybody with an active contract or active obligation with the military. Within the total force, there are different ranks. At the very top, we have commissioned officers. Within the commissioned officer ranks, there are 3 different grades: company grade, field grade, and general grade. Below commissioned officers are cadets. If you have an obligation, it means you've already received tuition money and will be commissioned, or will likely be commissioned. You might lose that, you might resign it, that's fine. But if you are an ROTC cadet with an obligation, you are a service member. Then below them, we have all the enlisted members. This makes up 80% of the total force. There is 1 officer to every 4 enlisted personnel. And so it's important to remember that when we say the troops or the services or the military, the vast majority of them are enlisted members. At the very top, we have non-commissioned officers, and below them, we have lower enlisted members. We used to have technical specialties. We don't have that anymore, Spec 5 up through whenever, but now we just have non-coms and enlisted. Then there's this other one, warrant officers. They are above cadets, but below commissioned officers. They have a specialty, but they are saluted. They are the new specialty tech specialists, but they are just below officers and above enlisted. And it's important to point out the differences because enlisted members take a different oath than officers. I will let you read that, but it's the one you've heard before. Defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and obey the orders of the President, etc., etc. There are some caveats. You do not obey unlawful orders, this vague, legally ambiguous term, but that is your oath to the Constitution and the people above you. Officers and warrant officers, however, they take an oath to the Constitution. They don't take an oath to other officers. They're almost like government employees. They're officers of the government. They're totally different titles within the United States Legal Code. Title 5 for officers, Title 10 for enlisted. I'll let you pause and read that if you like. Then within the military, for both officers and enlisted, we have 3 different types of military specialties. The closest to the fight are the combat arms types. Artillery, infantry, cavalry, special forces. These are the closest to the fighting, the conventional front line as we can think about it. They are classified as combatants under UN international law. Then, for at least in the United States, there's also combat support. Those are between the front line and the rear echelon folks. Those are transportation, supply, ordnance, stuff like that. Some of them are combatants under international law. Some of them are not. Then finally, we have combat service support, the farthest from the front line, but still uniformed service members nonetheless, both officer and enlisted, for all these 3 different types of military specialties. So what I've just described, the spectrum from combat to service, it's a spectrum. It goes from the closest to the fight, the tooth, in this tooth to tail ratio, and then the furthest from the fight, the tail ratio. And people in the tail may never see combat. They may never touch their weapon more than once a year to qualify. And so when we think of soldiers, if we think of, and I don't know exactly how it breaks down, but most soldiers are not combatants. Most of them are classified as combatants, but they don't touch their weapon. That's not their main prerogative. They may do a lot more paperwork than they may do trigger pulling. And so this tooth to tail ratio is a reminder that there's a diversity of responsibility and job specialty within the military, and they're not all the same. I'm going to go through these very fast. This is an example of the combat arms specialties. This is an example of the combat support specialties in between, and then finally the combat service support specialties at the tail of the tooth to tail ratio. And finally, the reason this is important is that if you think all the military does is kill and shoot their weapons, you'd be wrong, both statistically and morally. There is a difference morally between people who pull their triggers and people who sit and push paperwork. There's also a difference in responsibility between the lowest enlisted who take orders and the highest commissioned officers who give orders. The further you are from along both of those axes, which I've named here rank and specialty, the further up you are, the more, say, guilt you might impose, or responsibility, it might be a better word. The further away from the front lines and decision making you get, the less responsibility and the less guilt you might feel. So if you are a support specialty and you're just a lowly private, you don't have much responsibility. Your moral, quandaries and qualms about serving the military are very different from someone who makes a lot of decisions and who, because they're weird, spends all the time on the front lines. If you're a general making all these decisions and you're also a combat arms specialty and you spend a lot of time in the front arms, you're going to have a different set of responsibilities and you're going to feel different kinds of moral guilt for some of the things that you have done in war. And so all of this is to point out how different and diverse the military is, whether it's by rank or grade or by specialty or by proximity to the front line. The military is not homogeneous. The military is many people within an institution that can be both good and bad. And so more than anything, I want to point out that the military is not just one thing. Supporting the troops makes almost no sense because who are the troops? Well, they're mostly service personnel who are enlisted, who are not going to be in for very long. And so it's important that we understand the diversity within the military.